Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me. This presentation is about how those in charge have been able to effectively control whole populations. To begin, we must start about 6,000 years ago when, from my research, of which is all mostly circumstantial, I have found that pockets of humans existed after a great deluge, spread out and closed out from each other, all independently beginning to rebuild. Most inhabitants of the world had perished during this great flood, along with most all written record of the past. Somewhere, most likely from the Caucasus Mountains or another mountain range very near to the ancient area known as Mesopotamia, a civilization rose. One that seems to have somehow been able to hang on to much of this important historical record and information, whether through word of mouth or from either maintaining it through the flood or uncovering it somewhere on Earth after the flood. This information, if it is unknown to the other pockets of survivors on Earth, could stand to put those in possession of this info into a position of control. And this is the most basic form of population mind control, controlling important information unknown to the rest of the world and using that info against the ignorant. It's the first form of mind control. This group of people who still exist and are in power today were able to use this knowledge, the knowledge of the stars and skies, the sun and moon, the seasons, to effectively exert control over the unwitting masses. They knew, based on the position of the sun, that winter was fast approaching and that the days would begin to grow shorter. They would be the good Samaritans, the effective, responsible leaders who would warn the world of the upcoming darkness in order to prepare. Then, when based on the position of that sun, the days begin to get longer, these pious leaders would become like prophets and could convey to the sheep when to begin to tend the soil and lay the seeds for the upcoming fertile season. And of course, none of these things were ever freely done for the sheeple. They always had to pay some sort of tribute in order to receive this special knowledge. Like, for instance, when those in control knew of an upcoming solar eclipse, when the sun goes black. You must first understand that the sun was the end-all, be-all of the times, as without it, everything on Earth dies. These controllers would inform the masses of the upcoming darkness and would solicit tribute from them, in the name of the gods, of course. And in return, if the tribute was sufficient, the gods would only allow the sun to go dark for a short period of time and then would return to its splendor. The tribute was enough. They managed to avert another tragedy. Once again, they were there to save the day. And this, dear listeners, is how population mind control began. Over the ages, it took on many different forms and used many different tactics, but for the sake of time, we will now fast forward to the late 1940s when, as the story goes, the CIA received reports that the Soviet Union had engaged in, quote, intensive efforts to produce LSD, and that the Soviets had attempted to purchase the world's supply of the chemical. One CIA officer described the agency as literally terrified of the Soviets' LSD program, largely because of the lack of knowledge about the drug in the United States. And so on April 10th, 1953, the first civilian head of the CIA, and globalist, and communist, and murderer, and 33rd degree Freemason, and Jesuit, Allen Dulles, gave a speech laying out this LSD Soviet program, justifying the creation 3 days later on April 13th, 1953, of what is known as the MK Ultra program. And this is the diseased seed that has been nurtured and grown now into a veritable forest of deceit, destruction, distortion, and deception that covers the whole damn planet. MK Ultra's mind control experiments were classified, and what has been declassed is not the full story. They've only given us a small portion. What is publicly known is that it generally centered around, and listen closely, behavior modification via electroshock therapy, hypnosis, radiation, and a variety of drugs, toxins, and chemicals. Keep these in mind, folks, as we will be coming back to them throughout this presentation. And remember, just like those flood survivors from thousands of years ago, the CIA was able to compile, analyze, and keep secret much of the invaluable information that was discovered through these experiments, and can easily use such information against us all. These experiments relied on a range of test subjects, some who freely volunteered, some who volunteered under coercion, and some who had absolutely no idea that they were involved in a sweeping defense research program. From mentally impaired boys at a state school to American soldiers to sexual psychopaths at a state hospital, MK Ultra's programs often preyed on the most vulnerable members of society. And ladies and gentlemen, they found something there with these most vulnerable members of society. And that is why this area is the main area that these demons now operate. And to take this a step further, by understanding that it is much easier to control a vulnerable person like mentally impaired children or PTSD-stricken folks like mostly, but not always, soldiers, or the obviously mentally ill sexual deviants, then naturally if one wanted to control large swath of a population, then they would want and hope for a population that has large swaths of them in vulnerable states. You would want a population filled with a majority of sex predators, mentally ill, shell-shocked soldiers, and common everyday people so stressed out by the world to the point of being diagnosed with PTSD themselves, never having to serve a day in military combat. This would allow you to take all that knowledge and classified information compiled over the course of about 80 years and apply it on a large scale. And since the majority of the target population is by design now suffering from some sort of trauma-based disorder, then you can now effectively exert mind control over a whole population. Over the decades, this was easily done in third world societies, like in the Middle East, for instance. The stress incurred by living in a third world type of a country whereby simply surviving tomorrow is considered a feat, and with civil wars and wars versus neighbors all playing out not in some foreign land but in their backyards, like in Beirut, Lebanon in the 80s, just to give one example, with missiles flying in and landing in a town square, or drive-by shootings, car bombs, and terrorist attacks at any moment, keeping the whole population in a total state of fear, allowing for them to now be very easily controlled. Or even in the CIA agent Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Could you imagine having to live over there the last 20 or 30 years? This is modern electroshock therapy without having to use the actual electroshock. This is the CIA's way of taking what they learned via electroshock and applying it to large swaths of the populations. But this is America, not Beirut, right? Check out some photos from this past summer of love, and many will look identical to some of the media photos of the things going on in Beirut in the 80s. Again, just as one kind of example. Pull your head out of your ass and look around. You're living in a world that is just as stressful as those that lived in these types of areas during these times. It's just different types of trauma. Crime through the roof, mass shootings, including in our kids' schools, violence on TV and everywhere else you look, lies everywhere, including from the ones we are to trust, insecurities, many resulting in suicide due to the fake expectations created by social media, making our children depressed and feeling like victims. And we could go on, shaping their opinions, essentially telling them what and how to think. And now, especially in America, with the explosion of pharmaceuticals and industry almost completely controlled by the satanic sun worshippers, we see how they push their drugs upon us in a very intrusive way. An article by The Hill stated that about 65% of Americans are on some form of prescription medications. And 34% of Americans will have an anxiety order at some point in their lives, an anxiety disorder. Some researchers believe this number is closer to 50% due to many undiagnosed cases. So half, ladies and gentlemen, half of Americans are or should be on mood enhancement drugs of some kind. So now that we see that 65% of Americans are taking some kind of drug from Big Pharma, it isn't much of a leap when you understand who these people are to be a bit leery of what other things might be in those meds or what other unknown side effects there may be. This leads us to GMOs, or genetically modified organisms, like what they've done to most of our food. They're even trying to make the whole seed market consist of only GMO seeds, essentially making it so you can't even grow your own natural fruits and vegetables. GMOs could be a separate sole presentation. Many countries have banned their use due to safety concerns, along with concerns over long-term side effects that have not been properly tested. And that's a big statement. There's a reason many countries have banned them, and many of these countries are freedom-loving countries who are currently pushing back against the cabal powers that be, like my cousins in Poland. And so once again, understanding Monsanto and who they are and who they worship and what their larger goals are, we have to be suspicious of them and the things that we could envision them doing to our foods. And we must also recognize the people who were put in charge of the FDA during the last 15 years and see that they all came from Big Pharma, Monsanto, or the CDC. Other than the conflict of interest, we can see our foods and drugs being completely controlled by the cabal. Throw in the poisonous vaccines, and this covers the drugs, toxins, and chemical portion of the MK Ultra experiments, but now on a whole population. If you're not eating their foods or taking their quote-unquote medicines, then maybe you watch their television quote-unquote programming. On your screen is a U.S. patent entitled Nervous System Manipulation by Electromagnetic Fields from Monitors. We can't go over the whole thing, so I'll leave you a link in the description and you've got to go check it out. It says that physiological effects have been observed in a human subject in response to stimulation of the skin with weak electromagnetic fields that are pulsed with certain frequencies near a half a hertz or 2.4 hertz. Such as to excite a sensory resonance, or to excite you. Many computer monitors and TV tubes, when displaying pulsed images, emit pulsed electromagnetic fields of sufficient amplitudes to cause such excitation. It is therefore possible to manipulate the nervous system of a subject by pulsing images displayed on a nearby computer monitor or TV set. For the latter, the image pulsing may be embedded in the program material, or it may be overlaid by modulating a video stream, either as an RF signal or as a video signal. So quickly then, folks, this is saying that it's not only done via electromagnetic frequency, but this can also be achieved through the pulsating of the actual program that may be playing on your TV. The image displayed on a computer monitor may be pulsed effectively by a simple computer program. For certain monitors, pulsed electromagnetic fields capable of exciting sensory resonances in nearby subjects may be generated even as the displayed images are pulsed with subliminal intensity, or not noticeable by the naked eye. And this is amazing, folks. We are being literally hypnotized, ladies and gentlemen. But I want to read one more portion of this patent to you. It has been found that, indeed, physiological effects can be induced in this manner by very weak electrical fields, if they are pulsed with a frequency near a half a hertz. The observed effects include laziness of the eyeballs, relaxation, drowsiness, the feeling of pressure at a centered spot on the lower edge of the brow, seeing moving patterns of dark purple and greenish yellow with the eyes closed, A tonic smile, a tense feeling in the stomach, sudden loose stool, and sexual excitement, depending on the precise frequency used and the skin area to which the field is applied. So, dear listeners, they not only hypnotize you, but they are able to make you a rapist while they're at it, as they can entice sexual incitement from a person depending on the precise frequency used. And it would be natural to assume that this tech can now be applied to cell phones, no doubt. Disgusting, ladies and gentlemen. And if you don't think that they can create or make or induce a mass shooter, then you're being very naive. Please do a quick dive on the voice of God technology. Pay attention to Barack Obama's first DARPA head, and now Google's top tech executive, Regina Dugan, and her work, and it'll all make complete sense. And there she is. Look at this devilish freak. In fact, through a mentally vulnerable young adult who may have had some trauma issues growing up, who may have been put on antidepressant drugs, eats whatever is in the Gmos, takes his vaccines, and watches a lot of TV, so pretty much the average American teenager, the CIA could effectively hypnotize a human being and, depending on the frequency, according to the actual patent, can make them commit rape or even murder. And this covers the MK Ultra hypnosis and radiation experimentation, but now on a world scale. You see, ladies and gentlemen, they've expanded on the electroshock therapy experiments. They're done on a mass scale now through war, stress, fear, and chaos. They've expanded on their small-scale experiments on drugs, toxins, and chemicals. They are done on a global scale now through big pharma, GMO foods, and chemtrails. They've expanded their experiments on hypnosis and radiation by embedding frequencies into our TVs, phones, and computers, subliminally hypnotizing millions of people at once. They've got voice of God tech that can literally order certain folks to commit crimes in order to satisfy a Hegelian dialectic goal, like the elimination of the Second Amendment, among other reasons. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that things may be much worse than any of us ever really imagined. If you enjoyed this presentation, please like, share, and subscribe. And please consider supporting this channel on Patreon. The link is in the description. Thank you for watching.